The red and blue lights reflected off Deborah Wellington's frozen face as she stood, clipboard still clutched to her chest, staring at the squadron of vehicles that had just rolled up the dirt driveway. This wasn't how her Tuesday afternoon was supposed to go. Just 30 minutes ago, she had been confidently striding onto what she believed was community property, ready to issue yet another citation. Now surrounded by 8 muscular men in tactical gear who had materialized seemingly out of nowhere, Deborah was beginning to question her life choices. "Ma'am," said the tallest one, his voice deceptively calm, "I'm going to need you to step away from Mr. Reed's property line. I represent the Pinecrest Valley Homeowners Association," Deborah stammered, lifting her laminated badge as though it might shield her from the intimidating presence of what appeared to be a special forces team. "This structure violates Code 7.2 of our community guidelines." The man's weathered face remained expressionless. "This property isn't part of your HOA, ma'am." "That's impossible. I have the maps right here." She fumbled with her clipboard, dropping several violation notices in the process. The wind caught one, sending it tumbling toward a cabin that, admittedly, looked nothing like the cookie-cutter homes in her subdivision. "All land within 3 miles of Pinecrest Valley falls under our jurisdiction." A shorter, stockier man stepped forward. "Actually, Ms. Wellington, how do you know my name?" Deborah interrupted, her voice rising an octave. "You've been harassing my friend for 6 weeks. We did our homework." He gestured toward the cabin. "This is privately owned land. Always has been. It predates your development by 40 years. Deborah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This couldn't be happening. In her 15 years as HOA president, no one had ever questioned her authority like this. She'd built a reputation in 3 different suburban communities as the enforcer of order, the protector of property values. People feared her clipboard. They trembled at her certified letters. "Your subdivision ends 2 miles back," said the first man, pointing toward the paved road Deborah had left behind. "You've been issuing fraudulent citations. That could be considered harassment or even attempted extortion. The board will hear about this," Deborah said, trying to gather her scattered papers while maintaining some dignity. "We have lawyers." "So do we," said a third man, stepping forward to reveal an actual badge, a real one, not the laminated cardstock Deborah carried. "FBI, Anti-Corruption Task Force. We've been investigating complaints about your HOA for some time." Deborah's knees went weak. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, ma'am," said the FBI agent. "We have records of you attempting to find properties outside your jurisdiction, threatening elderly residents with eviction over holiday decorations, and collecting unauthorized special assessments that never appeared in HOA financial records." Blood drained from Deborah's face as she realized her carefully constructed empire might be crumbling. For 15 years, she had ruled Pinecrest Valley with an iron clipboard. Her word was law, her citations were gospel. And now, standing on the wrong piece of land, confronted by the wrong property owner, Deborah Wellington was facing the possibility that she had finally gone too far. "I think," she said, gathering what remained of her composure, "that we can come to some understanding. I'm just trying to maintain community standards. And I'm just trying to live in peace on my own land," said a new voice. A man emerged from the cabin, leaning on a cane. "Something you've made impossible for the past 6 weeks." Deborah squinted at him, recognition dawning. "You're the man who came to our board meeting. The one who tried to tell us that I'm not part of your HOA?" "Yes, that was me. I'm retired Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves. And these gentlemen are my former unit." Deborah's hands shook as she unlocked the door to her immaculate colonial-style home. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged. Furniture at precise angles, decorative pillows plumped just so, not a speck of dust visible on any surface. The control she'd lost at James Reed's property seemed to return slightly as she crossed the threshold into her domain. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since she fled the confrontation. Messages from board members who had somehow already heard about the incident. An email from the HOA's attorney requesting an urgent meeting. And most alarmingly, a voicemail from the county recorder's office confirming an appointment she hadn't made to review the original Pinecrest Valley plat maps. She poured herself a generous glass of Chardonnay and sank into her ergonomic office chair, swiveling to face the wall of filing cabinets that contained 15 years of HOA documentation, much of it carefully doctored to expand her power. "This is just a misunderstanding," she told Duchess, who watched from a monogrammed dog bed. "A simple boundary dispute. Nothing more." But even as she said it, Deborah knew she was lying to herself. The FBI agent's words echoed in her mind: unauthorized special assessments, fraudulent citations, harassment. She'd been operating for years under the assumption that no one would ever check her claims or challenge her authority. Most homeowners were too intimidated or too busy to fight back. Those who did were usually worn down by her relentless persistence and seemingly infinite free time. Deborah opened her laptop and navigated to the HOA's bank accounts. The main operating fund looked legitimate enough: lawn care services, pool maintenance, holiday decorations. But then there was the Community Improvement Fund, a separate account to which only she had access. An account that had paid for her kitchen renovation, Duchess's veterinary bills, and a timeshare in Boca Raton. "They can't prove anything," she whispered, but her usual confidence was fracturing. She began pulling files from the cabinets, creating piles on the floor, documents that needed to be shredded, records that needed to be altered, evidence that needed to disappear. Her doorbell rang, startling her so badly she knocked over her wine glass, sending Chardonnay cascading across her pristine white carpet. "No, no, no," she muttered, frantically blotting the stain with papers from the nearest file. Ironically, a stack of violation notices for unsightly stains or discolorations on visible surfaces. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Through the frosted glass, she could make out multiple silhouettes. "Ms. Wellington, FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial records related to the Pinecrest Valley Homeowners Association." Deborah froze, a wine-soaked citation still clutched in her hand. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. She was Deborah Wellington. She issued the citations. She didn't receive them. She enforced the rules. She didn't break them. "One moment," she called, voice artificially bright. "Just need to put the dog away." Instead, she raced back to her office, frantically gathering the most incriminating documents: the modified boundary maps, the duplicate ledgers, the letters from homeowners begging for extensions on payments she knew they weren't legally obligated to make. A loud knock rattled her front door. "Ms. Wellington, we need you to open the door now." Clutching the papers to her chest, Deborah looked desperately around the room. The window? No. There were agents in the backyard too. The shredder? Too slow. The fireplace? Electric? Not real. In a moment of panic, she stuffed documents into the one place she thought they might not look: Duchess's dog bed, burying them beneath the satin cushion. The small dog growled in protest. "Not now, Duchess," Deborah hissed. "This is serious." When she finally opened the door, her face was a mask of confused innocence. "Officers, is something wrong?" The FBI agent from earlier stood on her porch, warrant in hand. "Ms. Wellington, we have reason to believe you've been running a fraudulent operation through the Pinecrest Valley HOA, collecting unauthorized funds and enforcing non-existent regulations on properties outside your jurisdiction." "That's ridiculous," Deborah said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm just a volunteer board president trying to maintain neighborhood standards." "Then you won't mind if we have a look at your records," the agent replied, stepping past her into the foyer. His eyes immediately went to the wine stain on the carpet. "Trouble with beverages on approved surfaces, Ms. Wellington?" 6 months later, Deborah Wellington sat in the sterile visitation room of the County Detention Center, hands folded neatly on the table before her. The orange jumpsuit was 2 sizes too large and made from a synthetic material that would have violated at least 3 sections of her former HOA's dress code. Her hair, now showing streaks of gray she'd previously colored religiously, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. "You have a visitor," the guard announced, and Deborah's eyebrows rose in surprise. Her attorney wasn't scheduled until next week, and no one else had visited since her arrest. James Reeves entered the room, moving more easily with his cane than he had at their first encounter. He settled into the chair across from her, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Colonel," Deborah acknowledged, her voice quieter than it had once been. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be here," he admitted. "But I've been thinking about something my grandfather used to say. The measure of a society isn't how it treats its highest citizens, but how it treats its lowest." Deborah's lips thinned. "And I'm the lowest now, is that it?" "That's not what I meant," James said, leaning forward. "The investigation into your activities revealed something interesting. Before you became, well, the person I met on my property, you were once the first female project manager at your engineering firm. You championed accessibility features in public buildings. You organized meal deliveries for homebound residents." Deborah looked away, uncomfortable with this excavation of her past self. "That was a long time ago. People at Pinecrest Valley have been asking questions," James continued. "How did someone who once cared about community become so fixated on control? What happened to the woman who used to help elderly neighbors with their gardens instead of fining them for improperly stored hoses?" "Power corrupts," Deborah said simply. "I started believing that order was more important than people, that rules mattered more than reasons." She hesitated. "Why are you here, Lieutenant Colonel?" James placed a folder on the table. "The district attorney has offered you a plea deal. 5 years probation, restitution to all affected homeowners, and community service. In exchange for your testimony against the developer who created those original falsified documents. Turns out you weren't the first to realize there was money to be made in expanding HOA territories illegally. You just perfected the system." Deborah stared at the folder, conflicting emotions playing across her face. "Why would you, of all people, bring me this offer?" "Because I believe in second chances," James said. "And because Pinecrest Valley needs someone who understands both sides of the power dynamic to help rebuild the community governance. You can't be sarcastic. Part of your community service would involve helping restructure the HOA into something that actually serves the community rather than controlling it." James smiled slightly. Who better to dismantle a broken system than the person who exploited its every weakness? Deborah was silent for a long moment. The idea was preposterous. The residents of Pinecrest Valley hated her. She had made their lives miserable for years. And yet, there were good intentions in the beginning, she said quietly. "Before I got carried away, I really did want to create a beautiful, safe community." "I know," James said. "That's why I'm here." Deborah Wellington hadn't always been the terror of suburban developments. 10 years ago, she had been just another resident of Pinecrest Valley, a quiet devotee who kept mostly to herself. Her transformation began the day a neighbor's unkempt yard caused her to trip while walking her prized Pomeranian, Duchess. The neighbor apologized, but made no promises to fix the hazard. The HOA, at the time led by a passive-aggressive accountant named Martin, took no action despite her complaints. "If you think you can do better, run for the board," Martin had told her dismissively. It was the challenge that changed everything. Within 6 months, Deborah had orchestrated a campaign that ousted 3 board members. Within a year, she was president. Within 2, she had rewritten most of the HOA bylaws to give herself unprecedented power. Now, standing on James Reeves' property with her authority in question, Deborah wasn't ready to surrender the control she'd fought so hard to establish. "My jurisdiction is clearly defined in these documents," she insisted, finding her spine again as she pulled out a thick binder. "If you'll just review Those documents are forgeries," interrupted the FBI agent. "We've already compared them with the county records. The original HOA boundaries are half the size you've been enforcing." Deborah's mind raced. How had they gotten access to those records? She'd been careful to keep the original documents locked in her home office. The only people who had seen the modified maps were board members who never questioned her. "That's absurd," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm simply following the guidelines established by the developer." James Reeves shook his head. "The developer sold this land to my grandfather 60 years ago. I have the deed. It's never been part of any planned community. Deborah's face flushed red. Part of her knew she should retreat, regroup, consult with the HOA attorney she kept on retainer. But another part, the part that had made her the most feared woman in 3 subdivisions, refused to back down. Your structure violates county ordinances then. She pivoted, gesturing to the cabin. The roof pitch is non-standard. The exterior hasn't been painted in what appears to be decades. There's a vehicle on blocks over there. That's a restored 1967 Ford Mustang on a maintenance lift, one of the Special Forces men said. Worth about $120,000. And this is outside county jurisdiction. It's unincorporated land. Deborah felt sweat forming at her temples despite the cool autumn air. She'd built her identity around being right, around having the final say. The thought of being wrong, publicly, catastrophically wrong, was unbearable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, James said firmly, and to stop issuing citations to my property and the 5 others you've been harassing that aren't part of your HOA. 5 others? Deborah said weakly. The FBI agent nodded. The Johnsons, the Garcias, Ms. Petrovich, Dr. Washington, and the Millers. None of their properties fall within Pennycrest Valley's legal boundaries. These were some of Deborah's most frequent targets, the families who'd paid thousands in special assessments and compliance fees over the years. The families whose tears and pleas she had dismissed as the necessary cost of maintaining community standards. I need to consult our attorney, Deborah said, backing toward her Mercedes SUV with its custom HOA BOSS license plate. That's a good idea, the FBI agent agreed. You should also prepare to turn over all HOA financial records from the past 5 years. As Deborah fumbled for her car keys, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, genuine fear. Not the manufactured outrage she displayed when confronting homeowners about their mailbox colors, or the calculated intimidation she wielded at board meetings. This was primal fear, the realization that actions have consequences, and hers were finally catching up to her. The community center buzzed with tension as residents of Pennycrest Valley filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. News of Deborah's legal troubles had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some homeowners arrived with expressions of vindication, others with confusion, and a small contingent of Deborah's allies looked ready to defend her to the bitter end. Deborah sat alone at the board table, the other members having strategically called in sick. Her normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain. A button misaligned on her blazer, a strand of hair escaped from her severe bun. Dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed 3 sleepless nights since the FBI had carried box after box of documents from her home. Let's bring this meeting to order, she announced, voice brittle as she rapped her gavel. The room gradually quieted. As you may have heard, there have been some misunderstandings regarding HOA boundaries and finances. Misunderstandings? A voice rang out from the back. Elaine Petrovich, an elderly widow whom Deborah had fined repeatedly for unauthorized garden gnomes, stood up shakily. You threatened to put a lien on my house because I couldn't pay a special assessment. I had to take out a reverse mortgage to cover your fees. The assessment was for community improvements, Deborah countered, but her usual authority seemed diminished. What improvements? Demanded Tom Garcia, rising to his feet. The playground equipment you promised 3 years ago. The repaved walking trails. None of that ever materialized. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Deborah felt sweat beading along her hairline. This wasn't how HOA meetings were supposed to go. She was the one who did the questioning, not these subjects. Furthermore, she continued, raising her voice over the growing discontent, certain allegations have been made regarding our jurisdiction. I want to assure everyone that the board has always acted in accordance with the fake maps you created. James Reeves had entered the room, leaning on his cane, several of his former team members flanking him. The county recorder confirmed yesterday that you filed altered plat maps in 2016. Maps that conveniently expanded HOA territory to include properties like mine that were never part of the development. The room erupted. Homeowners shouted questions, accusations flying. Deborah banged her gavel frantically, but no one paid any attention. "Order! I will have order!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the chaos. A tall woman in a crisp suit appeared at her elbow. "Ms. Wellington, I'm Detective Sarah Collins, Financial Crimes Division. I need you to come with me." "Now, I'm in the middle of a meeting," Deborah protested, gesturing to the pandemonium around them. "I don't think you're in charge of this meeting anymore," the detective observed as two uniformed officers approached the table. "Deborah Wellington, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and filing false documents with government agencies." As the officers recited her rights, Deborah's gaze swept across the community center. Faces she had terrorized for years watched with expressions ranging from shock to undisguised satisfaction. The power she had wielded so ruthlessly was evaporating before her eyes. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted as the officers guided her toward the exit. "I've given everything to this community. Who's going to enforce the standards now? Who's going to make sure the Hendersons don't paint their front door teal again?" No one answered. Instead, as she passed the rows of seated homeowners, something unprecedented happened. Eleanor Miller, whose holiday inflatable decorations Deborah had personally removed and destroyed 2 Christmases ago, stood up and began to clap. Slowly, others joined in, not in appreciation, but in collective relief. The applause grew until it filled the room, following Deborah out into the parking lot. In the back of the police car, Deborah stared through the window at the community center growing smaller in the distance. The neighborhood she had ruled with such rigid control would continue without her. Hedges would grow uneven, unapproved wind chimes would tinkle in the breeze, non-regulation mailboxes might appear, and somehow life would go on. For the first time in 15 years, Deborah Wellington wondered if perhaps she had been wrong about what really mattered. Deborah looked down at her orange jumpsuit, then back at the man whose property she had tried to wrongfully claim. "The irony isn't lost on me. I spent years forcing others to comply with arbitrary rules, and now I'm living in a place where every aspect of my life is regulated." "Perspective is a powerful teacher," James observed. Indeed. Deborah reached for the folder, hesitated, then opened it. "If, and this is a significant if, the residents were willing to give me another chance, what would this new community governance look like?" James leaned back in his chair. "That's the interesting part. The new bylaws would require consensus rather than dictates. Enforcement would be secondary to assistance. The focus would be on why rules exist, not just that they do." For the first time in months, a genuine smile touched Deborah's lips. "So, no more clipboard terrorism." "No more clipboard terrorism," James confirmed. "Though your organizational skills might be useful for the neighborhood assistance program that's replacing the citation system." As they discussed the details of the plea agreement and the community reformation, something shifted in Deborah Wellington, not a complete transformation, but the beginning of one. The woman who had once derived satisfaction from others' fear was discovering the possibility of finding fulfillment in their flourishing instead. When the guard announced that visiting hours were ending, Deborah handed back the signed agreement. "I'm under no illusions, Lieutenant Colonel. Earning back trust will be harder than losing it." "Most worthwhile things are," James replied, rising to leave. "By the way, there's something else you should know. Duchess is doing well." "My dog." "Whoa. Eleanor Miller. The one with the Christmas inflatables you destroyed. She's been fostering her. Says despite having an authoritarian upbringing, Duchess is learning to play with other dogs." As James Reeves departed, Deborah Wellington remained at the table, lost in thought. In trying to create the perfect community, she had lost sight of what community actually meant. Now, facing the consequences of her actions, she had been offered something she had denied countless others: grace in the face of violation, and the chance to make things right. Outside the detention center, beyond the reach of her clipboard and citations, Pennycrest Valley was changing. Neighbors were speaking to each other again. Gardens were growing according to preference rather than prescription. And in Deborah's absence, community, real community, was finally taking root. Whether she could ever truly be part of it again remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Deborah Wellington was thinking beyond rules and regulations, beyond property values and compliance rates. She was thinking about people, their needs, their dignity, their right to live without fear of a knock on the door and a citation on their porch. The clipboard terrorist was beginning to remember what it meant to be human.